thermonuclear warhead.
It's generations ahead of where these people should be technically. How did they manage that?
Maybe they had help.
NBC had a science fiction series on a while back. You probably remember it. It was called Star Trek.
There are moments in television history that are so bold, so confronting that they leave audiences stunned, not just because of what's said, but because of the emotions they stir up long after the screen fades to black. One such moment came, not from an avant-garde drama or a controversial news report, but from a beloved science fiction series known for its optimism about humanity's future, Star Trek. At a time when television often avoided uncomfortable truths, Star Trek chose to lean into them. But one particular episode titled Patterns of Force didn't just slammed headfirst into one of the darkest chapters in human history. The episode was filmed and aired in 1968 during the show's original run. Yet, in some parts of the world, including Germany, it wasn't seen by the public for nearly 3 decades. This wasn't because of poor ratings, creative disputes, or network politics. It was because the episode recreated Nazi Germany in such shocking visual detail that broadcasters and governments deemed it too dangerous to be shown. The decision wasn't made lightly. The ban endured for over 55 years in various forms and generated an almost mythical status among fans. An episode so controversial, it was essentially erased from the show's official presence in certain regions. So what was it about this episode that made it so radioactive? Why did something created as a warning against fascism get caught in the crossfire of real-world trauma? And now that time has passed and the episode is finally being aired without restrictions? What does its return say about how far we've come or how far we still have to go? Patterns of Force wasn't intended to be offensive. It was, in fact, designed as a mirror, a stark reflection of what happens when people mistake efficiency for morality, when power disguises itself as order. The episode begins like many other Star Trek adventures. The crew of the USS Enterprise arrives at a planet that has deviated from the Federation's values. In this case, it's Ecos, a planet where the dominant society has embraced a political system, shockingly similar to 20th century Nazi Germany. Captain Kirk and Spock quickly realize that the planet's leader, John Gill, is not only an Earth historian from the Federation but has modeled the entire society after Nazi principles. What's shocking is not only the thematic choice but the visual fidelity with which this regime is portrayed. The uniforms are exact replicas of SS military garb. Swastikas hang on walls. Officers perform the Heil salute. Speeches mirror those delivered by Adolf Hitler. The production doesn't obscure these details or water them down with alien symbolism. They are literal recreations of real world fascism transplanted into a science fiction setting. The creators weren't glorifying it. They were condemning it. Gill believed that by removing the most evil elements of the Nazi regime, its racism, its genocide, he could replicate its societal order for good. But as the episode unfolds, it becomes clear that this experiment, no matter how intellectual, its justification was doomed. The ideology took root, mutated, and led to oppression, violence, and the same hatred Gill naively thought he could avoid. The tragedy was complete. A historian's attempt to impose order resulted in tyranny. And the audience was left not only disturbed but shaken by the implication that fascism, even when dressed up as structure or efficiency, leads inevitably to destruction. While American audiences watched the episode with a mix of shock and curiosity, it was Germany that responded with swift and decisive action. At the time of the episode's original broadcast, it had only been about 2 decades since the end of World War II. The Holocaust wasn't distant. History, it was a lived memory for many German citizens. Survivors were still alive, families still grieving, entire communities still rebuilding. The sight of Kirk and Spock in Nazi uniforms, walking past banners adorned with swastikas, wasn't just disturbing, it was traumatic. And for the German government, it wasn't just a matter of taste or discomfort, it was illegal. Under Section 86A of the German Criminal Code, any public display of Nazi symbols was forbidden. The law was enacted to prevent the glorification or normalization of fascist ideologies, and was applied without exception, even in fictional or satirical contexts. As a result, Patterns of Force was not just criticized, it was banned outright. The episode didn't air on German television for decades. It was removed from broadcast schedules, omitted from VHS collections, and entirely absent from early Star Trek box sets distributed in German-speaking regions. In some cases, the episode wasn't even acknowledged. Viewers would move directly from episode 20 to 22, never knowing a crucial part of the season had been intentionally skipped. For many fans, it became the lost episode whispered about. In conventions and fan forums, known only through grainy bootlegs or imported copies. And while this aura of secrecy may have heightened its legend, it also erased its most important contribution, a clear, uncompromising statement about the dangers of authoritarianism. What's especially tragic is that Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, had no intention of courting controversy for controversy's sake. His goal was to use science fiction as a lens through which to examine the moral and political dilemmas of the real world. He believed audiences were capable of grappling with uncomfortable truths if they were presented in thoughtful, narrative form. In Patterns of Force, Roddenberry and his writers weren't just telling a story, they were delivering a warning. They wanted viewers to see how easy it is to justify tyranny when cloaked in the language of peace, how quickly well-meaning structure can devolve into oppression. But the episode didn't just test the limits of television, it tested the limits of how much trauma a society can bear to relive, even in the service of education. German authorities weren't worried that viewers would become Nazis after watching the episode. Their fear was more subtle, and in many ways more profound, that the imagery, no matter how well-intentioned, could re-traumatize survivors, desensitize younger viewers, or even be co-opted by extremist groups. The swastika is not just a symbol, it is a scar, and scars don't heal when they're turned into props. The question then becomes, where is the line between historical reflection and re-exploitation? Can a fictional universe like Star Trek truly grapple with the magnitude of Nazism without unintentionally trivializing it? These are the moral complexities that surrounded the episode's ban, not just legal concerns, but ethical and emotional ones as well. The debate didn't stay confined to Germany. Although Patterns of Force was only formally banned in a few countries, broadcasters across Europe and even in parts of North America treated the episode with caution. Some networks delayed its airing or edited out scenes they believed were too provocative. Others avoided including it in reruns altogether. The episode's reputation slowly grew, not because people had seen it, but because they hadn't. Fans began to ask questions. Why was it missing? What could possibly be so bad in a show that usually aired with minimal controversy? For many, the episode's inaccessibility made it more alluring, more mythical. Over time, as home video collections expanded and online platforms began making episodes available without regional censorship, more fans finally got to see Patterns of Force for themselves. And what they found wasn't gratuitous shock, but a sobering parable about the dangers of authoritarian thinking. Far from promoting fascism, the episode exposed its seductive nature and devastating consequences. For many, it was a revelation. This wasn't Star Trek stepping out of line, it was Star Trek at its boldest, staying true to its core mission of challenging viewers to think, to feel, and to reflect. And perhaps that's the most remarkable aspect of this entire story, not that the episode was banned, but that it still holds so much power more than half a century later. Star Trek's history with censorship didn't begin or end with Patterns of Force. The franchise has often found itself clashing with cultural norms and government authorities around the world. Its stories, bold, political, emotional, have pushed the boundaries of what entertainment is allowed to say. In the 1990 episode The High Ground from Star Trek: The Next Generation, a single line of dialogue caused an uproar in the United Kingdom. When the character Data casually remarks that the Irish unification of 2024 was achieved through terrorist methods, British broadcasters immediately delayed the episode's airing. At the time, tensions in Northern Ireland were still high, and the IRA's violent campaign was ongoing. The idea of predicting or endorsing terrorism as a means of political change, especially for Irish reunification, was inflammatory. The episode wasn't aired in the UK until 2007. Similarly, Star Trek's depiction of the first interracial kiss in American television between Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura in Plato's Stepchildren was groundbreaking but also controversial. Some southern stations refused to air it. Advertisers pulled out. NBC even filmed a version where the kiss didn't occur in case backlash grew too intense. These examples show a pattern. Star Trek has never shied away from uncomfortable conversations, even when it meant courting censorship, whether it was mental illness in Whom Gods Destroy or religious extremism in Chosen Realm. The show consistently tested the boundaries of what was acceptable, and time and again those boundaries proved fragile, exposing the ongoing tension between storytelling, culture, and regulation. So now, more than 5 decades after Patterns of Force first aired and decades after it was banned in parts of the world, it is finally accessible without restriction. That doesn't mean it's easy to watch. The imagery is still disturbing. The implications are still haunting. But it can finally be seen and discussed in the open, and perhaps that's the greatest victory of all. Because the episode was never about glorifying a dark past, it was about warning us not to repeat it. In an age where authoritarianism is on the rise in various corners of the world, where disinformation spreads faster than truth, and where nostalgia can sometimes blind us to the horrors of history, Patterns of Force remains chillingly relevant. It reminds us that evil doesn't always come with horns and fire. Sometimes it comes dressed in order, efficiency, and control. Sometimes it speaks the language of peace while quietly extinguishing freedom. The episode's return offers more than just a missing piece of Star Trek's history. It offers a challenge. A challenge to viewers to think critically, to reflect deeply, and to never forget that even in the imagined future, the dangers of our past can still reach us. And if Star Trek's mission has always been to boldly go where no one has gone before, then perhaps Patterns of Force was a necessary detour, a reminder that before we reach the stars, we must first confront the shadows of our own humanity throughout its global journey. Star Trek has often found itself reshaped, cut, softened, or completely altered to meet the demands of differing cultures. These changes were not always broadcast to viewers or even acknowledged by networks. Instead, they happened quietly, behind the scenes, shaping how each region experienced the franchise. Scenes with same-sex affection have been trimmed or removed, entirely in conservative markets. Political critiques that challenge governmental structures have been muted or edited for tone. Specific language choices, especially those tied to gender identity, class struggles, or historical parallels, have been carefully rewritten or omitted, not for the sake of the story, but to avoid offense or backlash. What one country views as groundbreaking social commentary, another interprets as a threat to its moral or political order. And yet, what's most revealing about these countless acts of censorship is that they were rarely provoked by malice or recklessness on the part of the showrunners. In almost every case, the stories were not designed to shock or anger. They were crafted to spark thought, to challenge complacency, and to explore the tensions between idealism and the real world. That some cultures welcomed this intellectual collision while others recoiled from it tells us less about Star Trek and more about the societies watching it. And somehow, through all the censorship, editing, and omission, the core message of Star Trek has remained unbroken. Its soul has never been silenced. There's something truly remarkable about a television franchise maintaining such consistency of vision despite being censored or reshaped by so many hands. Even when episodes were removed, altered, or delayed, the essence of Star Trek continued to reach its viewers, the unwavering belief that truth, no matter how discomforting, is a journey worth taking. The show has always embraced conflict, not physical battle, but ideological confrontation. It has encouraged difficult conversations. It has urged audiences not to look away, even when the screen reflects something painful or unfamiliar. Fiction, especially science fiction, has a rare power to hold up a mirror to society. and Star Trek wielded that power without apology. It taught millions of viewers that questioning authority is not insubordination, it's progress. That equality is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And that peace is not found in silence, it's forged in dialogue. For countless fans, this is the very reason the franchise has endured for decades. Star Trek does not merely entertain, it teaches. It challenges. It pokes holes in sacred assumptions and exposes biases we didn't even know we had. Viewers walk away from an episode not just with a sense of wonder about space, but with questions about their own role in society, their own prejudices, their own willingness to confront injustice. Even when episodes were forbidden from being aired, the very reason they were banned became proof of their relevance. The stronger the message, the more resistance it faced. And that resistance only underscored its importance. It's almost ironic, then, that the franchise's most radical achievement was not its special effects, starships, or alien species, but its relentless refusal to play by television's safe rules. Star Trek was never designed to conform, it was built to challenge. From its very inception, the show pushed back against the polished, escapist formula that dominated 1960s American television. Gene Roddenberry, a former police officer turned screenwriter, wasn't interested in fairy tales about the future. He wanted to use the far reaches of space to explore the chaos of the present. And so, beneath the glossy surface of starships and alien worlds, Roddenberry planted deep-rooted commentary about racism, war, gender inequality, and class. He disguised complex moral questions inside simple plotlines. He got past the network censors by wrapping bold truths in the language of science fiction. What looked like a space adventure was actually a political metaphor. What sounded like technobabble was often a challenge to the status quo. At a time when American networks balked at the idea of diversity, Roddenberry cast a Japanese-American helmsman, a black woman as a communications officer, and a Russian navigator, all on the same bridge during the height of the Cold War and civil rights struggles. These weren't just casting choices. They were declarations. And for viewers who had never seen themselves represented with such dignity and intelligence, Star Trek wasn't fiction, it was hope. Roddenberry didn't stop there. He insisted on episodes that made people uncomfortable. He welcomed discomfort as a sign that the story was hitting its mark. One episode used aliens with half-black, half-white faces to expose the absurdity of racial hatred. Another critiqued the Vietnam War by showing how political interference on a foreign planet spiraled into endless conflict. Others examined the ethics of nuclear deterrence, the dangers of eugenics, or the manipulation of history. Writers like D.C. Fontana, one of the first women to break into science fiction television, recall how fiercely Roddenberry defended controversial scripts. When studios demanded changes, he pushed back. He knew the ratings might suffer. He knew advertisers might flee, but he refused to dilute the show's message. And in the end, his stubbornness paid off, not always in viewership, but in cultural influence. Though the original series lasted only 3 seasons, its impact was seismic. Critics eventually came to see Star Trek not just as a show, but as a social movement disguised as entertainment. Major newspapers published essays analyzing its metaphors. Professors taught it in university classes. NASA credited it with inspiring a generation of scientists. And when later series like The Next Generation or Deep Space Nine launched, they continued Roddenberry's legacy, diving even deeper into questions about identity, morality, and social justice. What's perhaps most astounding is how prescient Roddenberry's vision turned out to be. As society evolved, so did the issues explored in Star Trek. From artificial intelligence and gender identity to cultural erasure and post-war trauma, the franchise stayed ahead of mainstream discourse. And yet, it always returned to the same core principle: fiction must reflect reality if it's going to mean anything at all. Even when episodes faced bans or edits, whether in the US, the UK, Germany, or elsewhere, they often became more powerful for having been silenced. The censorship became part of the story. It proved that the franchise wasn't just playing pretend, it was making people think, making them feel making them uncomfortable in the best possible way. And that's the reason Star Trek has endured. In a world flooded with content, so much of it designed to soothe or distract, Star Trek has always stood out because it demands more of its audience. It invites them to ask hard questions, to challenge easy answers, to see the future not as a fantasy, but as a responsibility. And that, more than the ships or the stars, is what has made it timeless.